And it was incredibly inspiring, the resounding themes that came up about representation, about inclusion.
You marched and organized for equality and justice, for our lives and for our planet.
What do the speeches of Meghan Markle and Kamala Harris have in common? And why is it that their speeches have made a lot of people doubt their credibility? Find out in this video. This channel seeks truth through language by analyzing the structure and details of different conversations and interviews. Subscribe and click the like button for more videos. And don't forget to leave a comment. What do these speeches make you think or feel? Many of you have commented that the way Markle and Harris speak makes you feel the same. So I sat down to think about possible reasons why. I came up with 3 reasons, 3 points that I'll focus on. Pandering to the audience, as I call it. Buzzwords and broad statements. And self-praise. And at the end of the video, there's a surprise point. Let's focus on the concept pandering. Markle and Harris appeal to the same demographic in an overstated fashion. These overstatements make it sound like they're pandering to this demographic. To many people, pandering, understandably, comes across as condescension. It's a tactic often used by influential people, and linguistically, it has a twofold, self-protective function. It helps in silencing or mitigating critical and skeptical voices in this demographic. And it helps in silencing critical voices that aren't part of the demographic. That's because the speakers, with the use of pandering, equip the members of their demographic with standard responses like, "You're just a," insert whatever ism or phobia that's used to silence opposition today. Funny how it's always the self-proclaimed tolerant and open-minded people who want to silence others with ad hominems. It's almost as if they aren't that tolerant or open-minded. Or my personal favorite, "You're just a hater." Ever had someone call you a hater? Since hater is one of the most overused, immature and dishonest words, it probably means that you've said or done something right. Anyway, let's see some examples. Harris first.
This week marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, and we celebrate the women who fought for that right. Without fanfare or recognition, they organized and testified and rallied and marched and fought, not just for their vote, but for a seat at the table.
To pull up a seat at the table.
These women and the generations that followed worked to make democracy and opportunity real in the lives of all of us who followed. And these women inspired us to pick up the torch and fight on.
A little about constitutive rhetoric. At first, this can be a difficult concept to grasp, but once you get the hang of it, you can use it to analyze every political speech and commercial, and most of what the advertising industry tries to make you believe about yourself and the world. Harris uses constitutive rhetoric. This type of rhetoric is about uniting, but also inciting a certain demographic, inciting them to act in the real world. This rhetoric makes it look like everyone in this demographic is part of the same collective identity, that this identity has existed for a long time and is the same today as it was in the past. It's about making the past match the present. Never mind that the living conditions and hence the societal structures were different in the past. The alleged collective identity doesn't necessarily exist prior to the speech. It's the words that Harris utters in the speech that make it come into existence. That's why it's called constitutive. It constitutes an audience that isn't necessarily there. Rhetorically, it's there, but in reality, it's not necessarily there. Its existence hinges upon the belief of each individual, the very individualism that this type of rhetoric, ironically, seeks to erase. Politics is opportunism, always and anywhere. So the two most fundamental questions we could and should ask when trying to identify constitutive rhetoric are: why are they saying this, and who benefits from what they're saying? When what they're saying has nothing to do with specific policies or specific issues, it must serve another purpose, and this purpose is to create a community. Ultimately, constitutive rhetoric is used for self-serving reasons, to increase the politicians' control and thus power. It also gives people who need it or don't know any better a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is one of the most fundamental psychological needs people have, and in politics, fulfilling this need is a tactic. Let's see how Markle does it.
Went to Rwanda for a field mission to meet with female parliamentarians in Rwanda. It's an incredible country which has the highest percentage of female parliamentarians of any government in the world. 64% of their Congress is female, which is amazing. You know, any sort of speaking engagements I've done about women's rights has really come from that moment initially. My biggest focus has been gender equality and women's rights, all starting from something that happened when I was really young. When I was 11 years old, there was a commercial.
Markle's trying to constitute an automatic sisterhood, so to speak, that simply being a woman is enough to be part of this collective identity, and more importantly, that every woman should be able to recognize herself in this identity. What Markle says here fits perfectly with the part about creating a collective identity, irrespective of past and present events, irrespective of history. Markle's attempt to rhetorically establish a community is so broad and blind that she doesn't even consider one of the most prominent, unflattering reasons why the government she's talking about has this kind of representation. However, is Markle actually speaking for all women, or is she merely speaking for herself? To answer this question, we should consider her interview with New York Times and her podcast interview with Serena Williams. These interviews reveal important, self-serving reasons behind her pandering. Let's start with the podcast. Markle's quick to go from addressing a supposed general problem with the word ambition to talking about herself, how she's familiar with certain labels, allegedly, how she's personally felt the negative connotation behind the word ambitious since she started dating her now husband. I can only assume that she's referring to Prince Harry. Also, she has yet to show one single instance of being criticized for her ambition. On the contrary, it's always seemed like there's been plenty of room for her ambitions.
Once you hit the ground running, even if you're doing it quietly behind the scenes, which is what I've focused my energy on thus far, is meeting with the right people, meeting with the right organizations behind the scenes quietly, learning as much as I can so that I can maximize the opportunity we have here to really make an impact.
What about this new role? I mean, you're going to have a bigger platform, a bigger voice. What do you want to do with it?
As you said, the causes that have been very important to me, I can focus even more energy on, because very early out of the gate, I think you realize once you have access or a voice that people are willing to listen to, with that comes a lot of responsibility. Now, being boots on the ground in the UK, I'm excited to just really get to know more about the different communities here, smaller organizations who are working on the same causes that I've always been passionate about under this umbrella. And
in the engagement interview, she also seemed quite happy about the royal family that she had known about 1.5 years before the interview. So it couldn't have been all bad.
Have you met each other's families, I imagine?
Yes, his family's been so welcoming, and
You've met quite a few of them, actually.
I have, on both sides of his family, his mom's side as well, which has been really important to me too. But yes, the family has been great, and over the past 1.5 years, we've just had a really nice time getting to know them and progressively helping me feel a part of not just the institution, but also part of the family, which has been really, really special.
Whether she's conflating her feelings with reality, what actually took place, or she's making up a story that she wants her demographic to believe, is hard to tell. Returning to the podcast, notice how constitutive rhetoric works. She talks about herself specifically and then generalizes her feelings to everyone else in the demographic, saying that they make themselves smaller on a regular basis. While the advertising industry that Markle's dependent on has seen good money in repeating this same unproven claim, it's still a claim, and quite a bold claim too. Because with her rhetoric, Markle puts herself, someone who's had equal or more than equal opportunities, in the same boat as everyone else in the demographic, in the collective identity she's trying to create.
I'm born and raised here in LA.
Los Angeles!
Yes, I'm one of the 5. You can pinch me, I'm real. See, oh yes.
Well, are your parents in show business?
My dad is a DP, yes. He was the lighting director. My dad.
Director of photography.
My I didn't mean to make it sound so.
No, it's all right.
industry.
It's fine.
You help, yes.
On the one hand, this is the greatest strength of this kind of rhetoric, erasing all individual differences so that the speaker doesn't have to account for them. But on the other hand, it's also its greatest weakness, because all it takes for someone to debunk it is to say, I don't see myself like that, or I don't recognize what you're saying. Or even more damaging, you've lived a privileged life. Stop acting like you and I are in the same boat for self-interest. In the following interview, she also spoke about ambition in what appeared to be general terms. However, given her podcast with Williams, we can now be sure that she was talking about herself specifically.
And you look at that and go, how have we culturally allowed that to be the case? There's nothing wrong with talking about a woman's success or her ambition or her financial prowess. Why is it culturally we are equipping girls and women to think that if you are ambitious, there's something negative about that?
In light of this, when Markle says this to the interviewer,
you used the word ambition just now. And
it's a trigger word.
what? No.
it sounds like projection, that she assumes that ambition is a trigger word to everyone else, because it's a trigger word to her. Markle and Harris both use constitutive rhetoric for self-interest, before going along with every collective identity that influential people seek to create. This is an important point to consider. And again, ask yourself the two most fundamental questions. Why are they saying this? And who benefits from what they're saying? What actual relevance does it have that Harris keeps repeating a policy that's been in effect for 100 years? And what actual relevance does it have that Markle makes generalizations about a subject, ambition, that she can only point to anecdotally, presuppose that we can trust her anecdotes to begin with? Now, let's move on to buzzwords, the favorite words of politicians and celebrities and shallow people in general. A buzzword is a word that's fashionable at a particular time, and more often than not, it's empty jargon. Empty because it's so broad and undefined that it becomes devoid of meaning. Let's see some examples. Harris first.
And protecting our democracy takes struggle, it takes sacrifice, but there is joy in it, and there is progress. For 4 years, you marched and organized for equality and justice, for our lives and for our planet. And then you voted.
When speaking to uncritical audiences, to put it mildly, the speaker doesn't even need to define what these words entail. The audience will clap anyway. The speaker has nothing to worry about. Og to use a somewhat strange Danish idiom, der er ingen ko på isen. Besides buzzwords, influential people also often get away with painfully simple claims that are so broad that they become nonsensical.
But I pledge to you that we will act boldly and deal with our challenges honestly. We will speak truths, and we will act with the same faith in you that we ask you to place in us. We believe that our country, all of us, will stand together for a better future.
A simple way of recognizing much too broad claims and statements is to ask yourself the question, who would disagree with this? If the answer is no one, it's a sign that the speaker is being strategical and possibly deceptive. Let's see how Markle deals with buzzwords in a speech that I know many of you have come to love and view as precious and meaningful.
And just as a sidebar, earlier this afternoon we sat down with a few of you delegates, and it was incredibly inspiring, the resounding themes that came up about representation, about inclusion, about access, and about trying to shift the global perspective for all of us as a global community.
Representation, inclusion, access, global. That's about as deep as it gets. And to think this was a speech that was supposed to demonstrate Markle's knowledge of the organization in question, One Young World. To everyone's big surprise, of course, the speech turned out to be about something else. Or someone else, I should say.
How on earth did I get here? Have any of you today so far had that feeling, that pinch me moment where you just go, how am I here? And I was invited to pull up a seat at the table.
Next, a few points about self-praise. Markle and Harris have similar ways of making themselves sound unique and special. In Harris's case, she makes herself sound like the extraordinary end result of generations of people who have paved the way for her. We're supposed to admire her simply because she's there, not because she has certain admirable traits and talents. Harris is taking shortcuts to popularity.
And so I am thinking about her and about the generations of women have paved the way for this moment tonight. Women who fought and sacrificed so much for equality and liberty and justice for all. All the women who have worked to secure and protect the right to vote for over a century, 100 years ago with the 19th Amendment, 55 years ago with the Voting Rights Act, and now in 2020 with a new generation of women in our country who cast their ballots and continued the fight for their fundamental right to vote and be heard.
She masks this as a collective effort, but by pointing to herself as the extraordinary end result, we know that it's self-praise. It becomes even clearer in this clip.
I keep thinking about that 25-year-old Indian woman, all of 5 feet tall, who gave birth to me at Kaiser Hospital in Oakland, California. On that day, she probably could have never imagined that I would be standing before you now and speaking these words. I accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States of America.
This clip also shows impression management, trying to control the audience's perception of her, not only because of her remarkably and intentionally slow speech rate, but also because of the pause she makes at the end.
Of the United States of America.
With this pause, she's guiding the audience to think that this is a touching moment, an extraordinary proclamation. Markle's self-praise, making herself sound unique and special, is best illustrated by a speech that we have to watch a small portion of. Look, we have to watch it. It's the only way we can get to the surprise. Remember, I promised a surprise point. Deal? Thank you. Roll the tape. I said roll the tape.
When I was just 11 years old, I unknowingly and somehow accidentally became a female advocate. A pivotal moment reshaped my notion of what is possible. This commercial came on with the tagline for this dishwashing liquid, and the tagline said, "Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." I remember feeling shocked and angry, and also just feeling so hurt. It just wasn't right, and something needed to be done. So off I went, scribbling away to our First Lady at the time. Finally, I wrote to the soap manufacturer, and it was roughly a month later when the soap manufacturer, Procter & Gamble, changed the commercial. It was at that moment that I realized the magnitude of my actions.
Like Harris, Markle guides the audience's perception of her. She wants them to think that the highly trivial event she's describing is not only worth mentioning, but is also extraordinary. I've analyzed the speech in one of my previous videos. For the purposes of this video, I'd just like to point out that you're not supposed to laugh or smile about things that supposedly make you feel angry and shocked.
Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans.
People might get the wrong idea and think that you're being deceptive, but you didn't hear that from me. And now the surprise point. You've earned it, and quite frankly, I've earned it too. Listen to how Markle says she met Harry.
But the friend who introduced you, was she trying to set you up?
Yes, it was definitely a setup. It was a blind date.
It was a blind date,
And-
for sure.
Let's compare this narrative to Harris's narrative.
Family is my husband, Doug, who I met on a blind date set up by my best friend.
With the 3 main points and the surprise point, it's time to end the video. Be sure to click the like button, subscribe and leave a comment. And share this video with someone you think needs to see it. See you next time.